Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Learning Future podcast. You're in for a special treat today, as am I, because our guest today is Dr. Anne Nock. Uh, Dr. Anne Nock, in full disclosure, is a friend and colleague of mine at the Learning Future. She's actually our Director of Strategy, Culture, and Learning Environments. But beyond that, she just brings an amazing array of skills and experience to the education landscape that she works across. She's also delightfully the author of a recently released book called School by Design, a field guide to transforming learning, culture, and place. Anne has a PhD from the University of Melbourne that explored how teachers successfully and sustainably transition into innovative learning environments within the context of complexity theory. She has also led now for many years, I'll say, Anne, professional study tours across the globe, in particular to Europe, where the participants get to see leadership and education across different contexts, countries, cities, and certainly an array of practices. She's a mother of two and is just an absolute lover of the outdoors and an incredible human being. And how fun's this? Thanks for joining us on the Learning Future podcast.
So lovely to talk to you, Luca. It's been so
It's a,
long
it's
since
a,
we've spoken.
I know. 20 minutes ago, we were having a great
Yeah,
chat
I
about
know.
what we're doing. But it is really lovely, actually. I just want to say congratulations on putting this
Thanks.
this work together, across all the decades of experience you've had, all the learning you've had, you've really kind of said, this is something that I think we need to understand in our work across schools.
It is.
My first question is going to be, what is something that you are learning at this point in time?
Well, right now, our work, Luca, your work and my work, is so much engaged in designing strategy. When we talk to our schools, we often say, yes, we say strategic planning because
Mm,
that's what people know it as. But in reality, we do strategic design. So I'm learning formally strategic design or strategy by design through IDOU, but I'm also learning at every engagement we have with one of our schools. I learn a little bit more about what it means to be strategic and how we can help schools be strategic as they navigate their way through a complex and uncertain future.
mm. And I've learned a lot about complexity from you, especially from your research. I want you to just take us into that world a little bit. Like, everyone understands what a strategic plan is. It's
Yeah.
often on the website or some. What's really the difference between strategic design and a strategic plan, and how does complexity
Hmm.
play a role in that difference?
When I was doing my PhD, I really struggled with the whole philosophical, the in PhD is philosophy. And I struggled with, getting my head around that. It wasn't until one of my supervisors said, you should read complexity theory. And I read it and thought, oh, where's this been all my life? This is who I am. I
Mm,
think this way. When you think in complexity, you're not satisfied with simple 5-step plans. You actually know that there are so many variables coming in and there's so many ways that you could achieve the outcomes you want to achieve. There's not one way to get there. I think that's the essence of complexity, is being comfortable with that sense of getting clarity from uncertainty rather than certainty. This is the way we're
uh,
going to go. And when I talk to schools, and I explain this, I always say, yes, you remember those schools who did their strategic plan in 2019? It didn't quite play out the way they wanted it to play out. That's where we are with complexity. And that's why we talk about strategic design, because
mm,
we know the context, we know our students, we know the if we crudely the market that our school might appeal to, but we can't assume the way we've always done it and we just keep going on business as usual is going to actually serve our young people and their future. Because in essence, the strategic plan is about what are we doing for our young people and for their future, not
mm.
maintaining our systems business as usual.
It's something that we reflect on a lot, Anne, is this idea that a strategy implicates a set of choices. And of course, as in
Basically,
our futures work, it's really
yeah.
about stating the collective vision for the preferred future that you want to create. And
Yes.
then, of course, making a set of choices that
Yeah.
arcs your organization from where you are now to where you want to be. And I'm really interested in the space in between, which I think
Yeah.
you and I often talk about as complexity. And certainly that's been your worldview. Um, I think the challenge that we find, and I want you to talk a bit to this, Anne,
Mm.
is there's safety in certainty,
Sure.
especially now in this world where we see exponential
Yep.
change with converging technologies, synthetic biology and artificial
Mm.
intelligence, add in, energy transformation, geopolitics.
Mm.
There's so
Mm.
much going on.
Mm.
So can you kind of explain like what you've noticed about even as you work with these leaders across the world,
Mm.
what are you noticing about the shift from certainty to clarity, perhaps?
I think there's a misconception that complexity is chaos, is chaotic, and it's not. So I'm
Interesting.
sitting here and I'm looking at a bush. I live in the city, but I have a bush outlook, and it is complex. There's so many different trees that I can see out there. It's not, you and I talk about it's not that ordered, single pine forest. They're all in rows. It's the complexity of this, but in complexity is order. What we are
Mm,
doing is helping our schools when we do strategic work is acknowledging the context that we're in, then creating a sense of order. I learned this just personally in my life. I was a kid who lost everything, came home without all of that sort of thing. But it's been in, I guess, in my adult life and not all that recent. So it has been all that recent that I realized that sense of order is really important, and having systems,
yeah.
systems that allow us to be both attend to the order, but be flexible and adaptable as well. The things aren't mutually exclusive.
Mm. It's a beautiful way to put it. And just to come to your book, you
Yeah,
have two parts to the book,
yeah.
really.
What
The first
you
is
mean? You
Foundations for
mean
Change.
this one here?
Yes, the one you're holding in your hand. For anyone listening to this, yeah, it's a fantastic way that you framed this. And so, part one, Foundations for Change. Part
Mm,
two, the playbook.
mm.
Take us first into the Foundations for Change. Including what is the shift from classroom to learning ecosystem,
Sure.
or leadership, or same
Yeah,
pageness, which is the word I associate almost the most with you.
yeah,
Agentic learning design. Why
yeah,
does that matter? And then, of
yeah.
course, your zone of genius uniquely is this power of place, learning in a specifically designed space, and how that interfaces.
So to get a little bit meta with this, I'm looking at the
Ooh,
construct of the whole book. It's very much a reflection of me. This is not a book where you go, I start at chapter 1 and I finish at chapter, what's the last chapter? Chapter 11. I finish at chapter 11, right? It's not linear because life isn't linear.
yeah.
Part 1, that foundation for change, really is about what I discovered throughout my professional life in education, and then narrowed it down to my PhD thesis, which is also, there's a whole chapter in there about my professional approach to education. So it is very much a story of my what I've discovered throughout life. And I just drew out those things from a PhD thesis, the key concepts, and I've attempted to put them in a palatable format so that people can really help to understand. When I was
Mm,
sitting in my, just tangent here, when I was sitting in my graduation, the two education PhDs people sitting either side said, I'm glad that's over. I hate my thesis. And I just sat there and said, I really love mine. It was really important
yeah.
to me. It was important. The concepts taught me so much. The process was
Yes.
hard, no doubt about that. But what I learnt from it has been so valuable because it's validated, I guess, a lot of the things I've been talking about. That idea that even that first chapter of classrooms to ecosystems, that idea that that classroom, that linear organization of children, one of the people I quote Wright, 2017, a New Zealand academic, talks about the paradigm of one teacher, one classroom, one subject at a time,
Mm.
one class, one bunch of kids,
One school,
and that
yeah.
have a whole paradigm of education is based around this paradigm of one,
Interesting.
where nothing outside of education is a paradigm of one, it's a paradigm of together. And so
Mm.
the founding premise of my book really centers on, I looked at teachers who were co-teaching and what was the tipping point for them in the co-teaching environment to be able to say, this is both successful and sustainable. And generally speaking, they said, we just wouldn't go back. We just love this idea of
Mm.
being with colleagues, which led me to the idea of same-pageness. And this concept came because every team in some way or another spoke about being on the same page was critical. Even the ones where it wasn't working well said, imagine the possibilities if both grade partners are on the same page. Whereas others
Mm.
said, sometimes kids try to play us off like they do about mum versus dad, but we're on the same page. They know, right? So it was just a word that emerged in every team that I talked about in this co-teaching in these innovative learning environments. Now, a caveat here, innovative
Mm.
learning environment doesn't mean open plan. None of these, we've got this fixation in education that's either traditional classroom or it's open plan. What I'm
Right.
talking about here is an environment that allows for different types of learning, pedagogy, grouping, ways of working to simultaneously occur in the one place. Bit like how lots of the world works. But
Mm.
it's a shift we have to make in education.
Beautiful, Anne. What about the role of the kind of chapter on agentic learning design? Tell us
Mm.
why that framing? Why agentic learning design versus another way of perhaps approaching or designing a learning experience?
Yeah. Well, agentic learning design puts the student as the agent, puts them at the heart. We use design principles in our work. We do empathy mapping. We look at the context and the experience of the student. When we work with schools, we have those 4 domains: the learner experience, professional culture, systems, organization, and then places and spaces. But it's always first the learner experience. We always need to come back to that before we jump to how we're going to work in our professional culture. And I have a abiding memory of this when I was
Mm.
working at the school in Sydney where Stephen Harris was the principal. And there was an amazing space there. And Lou Deby and Chantel Love in particular were such inspirations in how they worked and how they made 180 kids and 6 teachers work. I could see it firsthand. But I remember
Wow.
walking into a room one day when Chantel was sitting down with a couple of students. She was running through the unit of work they were going to teach in the next term with these students saying, what do you think?
Oh,
Is this going to work for you? How will this, getting their take on it
wow.
rather than saying it's
Interesting.
secret teacher's business and then we do the big reveal. How do we get the students' take on it? And that's what's at the heart of agentic learning design, is doing it from the perspective of the learner, and differentiation then becomes part of the whole package. How are we ensuring, if we empathy map, that those different personas that we might have highlighted are each going to have a quality experience?
Mm. I, the other piece in this work that's really brought to the surface is the role of leadership.
Mhm.
So I really like you to take us into that idea of theory to action is one thing, but then, how do we transform as leaders
Mm,
um,
mm,
into, like what is your kind of, with all the incredibly different contexts in which you've worked, Anne? I think it's such a rich experience you bring to this.
mm.
What is it that you notice about leaders and their development that you want to put
Yeah.
here?
I think you and I would say we're noticing more and more that many leaders are seeking to move away from a hierarchical posture, that their word seeps down and that everyone carries it out. And we know, I guess one of the findings I had was we need to shift from this hierarchical um, way of working and getting people, I use the term cross-scale relationships within the school hierarchy, because a hierarchy exists, and it gets back to that sense we need order.
Yeah.
So it's not sort of everyone equal, but there is a sense of order, and there are decision-making accountabilities that need to be done. But there's also a sense of freeing up the leader to say, you don't have to know everything, and you
Mm,
don't have to have the answer to every question. That term my colleague Steve Collis used to say when we were working on our workshops, the smartest person in the room is the room.
yeah.
So how do we draw on those people? So I use an example in the book of one of the schools that I worked with as a case study, and it was a multi-cohort co-teaching environment, and the principal had some really tight ideas on how she saw it, what she wanted to make it work.
Mm,
And one of them was that there should be no class teacher, that all the teachers should work with all the children. And the bunch of the teachers came to her and said, look, we really feel that these students actually need a home base. They need a home teacher. And they made the case. And instead of
mm,
her going, no, 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 this is how we're going to do it, she heard their point and said, okay, we'll work with that way, because she listened to what they were saying. So it's that sense of we're helping leaders get off the hook, right? We're
huh,
helping them not to think they have to have the answer. And I think one of the things I began to see is that sense of there's not a separate office for each member of the leadership team, but they're together in those offices, bouncing off ideas, that kind of thing. That's a tangible way of actually seeing how that hierarchical way of working um, is visible to the team around them, the staff around them, that, we don't have our own offices. That's not the hierarchy we want. We want people
mm,
together.
mm. You talk about a few models in, well, you call them tools, right? And I
Yeah.
think one of the best things about the book is the tools that are in it, really. Alongside the narrative, it's that here's something that is a mental model or a frame or a activity or something that you can kind of get your get your hands around, I guess, as a reader and as a
Yeah.
practitioner in a school or
Mm.
in a context where there's learning taking place. What are some of the ones that stand out to you most
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
across that suite?
So, I'm an immensely practical person. I love the big ideas, but the how has always been my driver.
Yeah.
Yes, it's wonderful to have these great ideas we want to do, but how do we get people around the ideas? And it was while I was at Skill, my colleague Steve introduced me to the idea of learning design and design
Mm,
thinking. And I
mm,
saw the value of dialogic, making project progress through dialogue, how we can bring out the each person in the room has something to offer. So over the years, um, I use tools. Some of the tools in the book are from uh, Liberating Structures. I did some training with them a number of years ago. They're
mm,
ways of us just getting ideas out of our individual head into the collective consciousness.
mm.
I use that. I have this brain that makes up tools. So there are tools in there that I've made up and have worked with and used over time. It's just this way of thinking, what does this group need to make progress? We
Right.
often know that the noisiest person around the table might get their voice heard first. And we also know that the quietest person around the table usually has the gold, but is too quiet to speak up. These tools sort of democratize or seek to democratize that way of thinking around the table to get to get a working consensus is a term I love. To reach a working consensus, we're not all going to agree, but can we
Mm,
reach a working consensus on this particular idea?
yeah. The question that comes into my mind and that I've heard from you many times is like, can we live with this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Instead of like, are we 100% on, it's like, can you live with this? Absolutely, I can.
And because
Um,
at the heart of design
yeah,
is iterating and prototyping.
yeah,
I don't have to live with
yeah,
it forever. We can
yeah,
live with it.
sure.
We say that's not working very well.
Yeah,
What do we go back to?
yeah,
It's never, the thing I always love to say, it's never tied up in a bow and go, here it is.
Yes.
It's actually something that we're always working on. And I think that's a mindset that is that shift from the hierarchical posture. Here it is. This is what we're going to do, to the design thinking to say, we're always on a cycle of watching, observing. One of the questions I have is, what do you notice? Whether it's at the start of the process, what are you noticing that's causing us to think about this as a problem to be solved? And then as it's
Mm,
going on, what are you noticing?
mm,
Continually looking at that to see whether or not what's working, what isn't.
yeah. Yeah. I think one thing that I often think about, Anne, um, is like what we just to your point, like what are we noticing? Or what are we paying attention to? It's just
Mm,
such a great question,
mm,
especially, I mean, even at the kind of societal, social layer. We have our attention is being hijacked right now, and
mm,
this is a I would say, a position that you and I hold and the Learning
mm,
Future holds strongly,
mm.
which is, our attention is under attack
Yeah.
and our cognition is also under attack, and so is childhood for a whole
Mm,
range of different reasons. Hence, we're seeing this kind of pushback against some of the kind of dark patterns and the big
mm,
tech things that we're seeing happening in the world. Um, what do you think it is? I think you talk about the four elements that make a school, right? You know, uh, Gilassen's work, I think it is. And,
mm.
obviously it's the core of our work now that we want to go and work
Yeah.
alongside schools and strategy. Just take us a bit more into that because there's
Yeah.
the framing, so much of this is just a framing exercise. Like if we're in this particular frame, we can't see outside of it. So if you
Mm,
just think teaching is I instruct, I teach, you learn, there's a transaction.
mm,
That's one frame. But
mm,
of course, the first frame we start with is learner experience. So take us a bit
mm,
into the
mm.
Venn diagram
Yeah.
that we use, and particularly you use all the time, that tries to help people notice what's taking
Mm,
place and from that place craft good strategy and good action to change.
yeah. When I was doing all my reading for my PhD thesis, few people have been reading about the work of Giz Larson. Is actually an in-school a school teacher, but he was
Mm,
researching in school and learning environments. And there was always this is one quote that he had in his work is school design is comprised of a network of elements that together make up the learning environment. And that was very powerful to me because it gets back to that sense of creating order. Where do we start? If we want to improve our school, if we want to make progress,
mm,
where do we start? We could just the thing about complexity theory is that we can't have a reductionist view. We take that part out, we fix that part, we put that part in, but we see things as an ecosystem where this part impacts this part, impacts this part. So that's great, but where do you start? So
mm.
this network of elements, and we've repurposed the language different to the one that Gislason and Owens and Valesky, they were the other two that talked about it.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in terms of student experience, professional culture, management and systems, and then places and spaces and resources. And I always talk about it in this way. And this is where I differ from those other researchers in this. I have an order to this.
Mm.
Schools exist for the student experience. That's first. And when we talk about vision, Luca, we always
Yeah.
say that the school vision has to be centered around the student experience, the learner
Yeah.
experience. We never have a school vision that says, this is a great place for teachers to work. No,
Mhm.
it might be, but our vision has to be centered around the learner experience. So, what is it that we see? I often use the term, I get people to picture this and they describe the learner experience. But
Mm.
that human element is supported by the professional culture on the other side. And this is how the adults in the environment work. What I discovered in my research was that the principal is the culture builder, or the leadership team might be the cultural builders, but it's the staff who are the cultural bearers. We
Yeah.
can't expect, they have to, that learner experience has to be reinforced by the culture that is modeled by the staff in the school. So if we focus on those two, so much of our work, isn't it, Luca, belongs in those
Mhm.
two spaces. helping people to go, what for your students? What do you want for the professional culture? Just as a sidebar, when we talk about values, how often do we see values in terms of the professional culture and how it's outworking, rather than seeing values as we want our children to have integrity, courage, and honesty? Well, what
Yes.
does that mean? What do the values actually mean for the professional culture? Because values shape culture. That's just a persistent flea in the
Yeah,
ear
great
that I
point.
am about
Yes.
to people. So we get those human elements right. Then we talk about how we organize our systems. This is our diagram I'm describing here with my hands up. How we organize our systems. Because systems aren't humans. Systems have to support humans. I know you and I've read Rebecca Winthrop and Jenny Anderson's book about the disengaged teen. And right at the
Mm.
start of that, they describe the life of a student going into class, 40 minutes, that class, unpack, do that, think about that, pack it all up, go to the next one, repeat across a day.
Mm.
That is a system that we are serving instead of a system that serves the people. So we often use timetables as one of our key systems in the school. As
Yeah.
is this system serving the people, or are the people serving the system? And then from when we get all of that right, or get clarity on those things, then we think about the learning environment and how the learning environment can support the human activity and the systems that are serving the human activity. Um, I'm a big fan of not leaping to how do we design a school without thinking about those elements first.
Mm. I love the I love how you described that, and obviously, this is work that we do together, and it's just
Mm,
so nice to hear you put it so crisply. Because the framing, even the values that hold professional culture, and one of the things that we've seen emerge through our work, of course, is that values that are single terms,
mm,
integrity, trust, respect. I always think about, it's a bit of an old example now, but Enron, which effectively became a pyramid scheme and, was defrauding, people
mm,
billions of dollars, had integrity and, trust as their values. And so it's not what are the values you have, it's how are these values lived out. And this
yeah,
idea of mantras or phrases,
yeah.
so you hear, and, in all the great diverse schools we walk into and learning environments, you can hear the culture in the language.
Mhm,
And as an applied
mhm,
linguist, how I nerd out about this.
mhm.
If you record a conversation, you work out how many questions to statements there are, if there's collective pronouns or singular pronouns, like all of those are cultural markers. You can
Yeah,
literally, you know, you can actually predict quite well how effective a culture is based on the language used. And so this
yeah.
idea of, phrases that, often hold tension in them,
Mm.
you know, um, is just something that I think is really interesting that we're seeing schools move
And
with.
how many of the schools that have that word excellence, which is a great word,
It's an
but
excellent
on
word.
its own, what's it saying? And we often get the exec teams in particular we're working with to say, well, what do we mean by excellence? Do we have a shared understanding? Are we on the same page with what excellence means for us?
Mm,
Rather than um, it just means that it's only academic achievement and it's only the cream and it's those things. So it's about, yeah, not throwing around words, but actually understanding and knowing what they mean.
yeah. Yeah, it's such a great point. I think the other thing I'm curious about, Anne, is, one of my favorite phrases at the moment is to include and transcend.
Mm,
It's this idea that, because, we encounter so many dichotomies through our work.
mm,
And
mm,
yes, it's easy for us because we're not in the daily work of educating children and the
mm,
complexity of
mm,
that.
mm,
But we are a little removed, but that also gives us a vantage point to
mm.
realize that the camps don't necessarily serve us. Yes, we need to be clear about what we're doing and what we're going after. And so I think it's why this idea of, well, yes, we do this and we do this, the both and orientation rather than the either or orientation. And how else can we think contingently or lead adaptively if not
Okay.
using
Yeah.
those kind of aspects?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I'm a big both and fan.
yes. Yeah. I'm really interested in what's an example that you would call out from your work?
Mm,
The book is called School by Design,
mm,
and so actually perhaps this is where we should make the case for design. Like in my journey, classroom teacher, into school leadership, some policy work, then, teaching design thinking and innovation, I guess.
mm,
And now, kind of running this organization with you and a few others. What I've only just started to call myself a designer. And I think as
mm,
teachers, we don't see ourselves as
mhm,
designers.
mm.
Why should we?
Designers think about possibilities and um, not solutions, jumping to solutions. I guess I also nerd out on the Cynefin framework, Snowden's work. Um, and he talks about the 4 types of problems that we might face: simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. Now, if it's a simple and a complicated problem, that's fine. Follow the plan, get the right result. Follow a recipe, get a
Mm,
tech expert in. They're fine. Complicated things can be like I use the idea of the watch. It can be taken apart. It's complicated. It's not complex. Take it
yeah.
apart, fix it, put it back together again. Chaotic, pin the tail on the donkey. You have no idea. You've got nothing. You just need help to get if you're in a chaotic environment. But the a complex environment is where we have both a sense of we want to create order and we have a sense of
Mm.
optimism that actually we can see a way through. When you're playing pin the tail on the donkey, there's no optimism that you're going to get anything.
Yeah. It's a
Complex,
strange game, that one.
complex problems, you go, actually, I think we've got between us, among us, we've got the smarts to be able to do this. So there's optimism and there's confidence that what we bring to this task can get it done. So
Mm,
at the heart of design is complex problems to be solved. We don't need a design solution to repair a car. We just need to follow the manual to do that or get that person in. Design is when we've identified, we've noticed something,
mm,
we can see it can be better, but we just don't have the clarity of the A to B, how we're going to get from the current state to the future state. But
yeah.
we see the future state as doable. And that's where design comes into these problems. And if you think about everything around us, the problems we've shaped throughout history have been things where people have conquered a complex problem.
Mm. So good, Anne. Reminds me of one of my favorite sayings, which I don't know where it's come from, but education isn't rocket science. It's far more complex than that,
Yeah, because
which I think
rocket
just
science
nails it.
is
Like,
complicated.
can you imagine even, if we zoom out for a minute, you think about, okay, let's put 27 unique human beings that are around the same age in a single room with one adult and see what happens. How complex is that? They all have different needs. If anyone's got children and you think about your children, you have more than one, how similar are your two children that grew up in the same home? They're radically different usually,
That's right. That's right.
which is such a curiosity, So this idea that I think back to your point on excellence, there's excellence through a ranking paradigm, which is a
Yeah.
standardization
Yeah.
approach
Yeah.
versus excellence through a personal
Yeah.
paradigm,
Yeah.
which is really around uniqueness and contribution. And of
Yeah.
course, you and I talk about this all the time in our work. What we need is really like, how do you get to, matching rather than ranking, clarity rather than certainty,
Mm.
you know, um, this idea of contribution rather than excellence, it's all,
Yeah.
I think. So it's just a really interesting piece. Like, what are you going to do with the brilliant things that you've learned? How valuable can you be? How much value do you create for others, for a marketplace,
Mm.
through a role, whatever the case
Mm.
might be?
Mm.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing that I had a tipping point when I was learning about design, and somebody said to me, think about the problems we solve and the work people do. We don't want surgeons to be iterating and prototyping on us. That's not there are things that you don't have to put a design head to.
Yeah.
because we just want them to be research-based and to do all those things. But there are other things where we have a bit of wriggle room.
Mhm.
So in the work that we do, because we're really applying a lot of these things, is that idea of enabling constraints that we often talk about. And that helps us to go, okay, within a design parameter, there are constraints we work within. Think of the
Mm.
artist and the designer. The artist can go with ever medium, do whatever they like. There's no constraints. But the designer thinks about, who am I designing for? What's the problem to be solved? But once we get those constraints right, then we can be free to be as creative as we want to be. And
Mm.
we look at those sort of when we work with schools in a strategic design perspective, we're saying to them, well, what are the guiding principles of this? What's rock solid? We can't go beyond that. And what are the things where there's a bit of wriggle room, where we can be adaptive?
Mm.
And helping them get clarity on those two things. So it's often those foundational values and those things that hold them together, their ethos, they're often the rock solid, but there's other things that aren't rock solid, and we can actually adapt in that context.
Mm. Do you know, it reminds me of a chat I had recently on this podcast, with Jermaine and Bob, who are futurists from the Institute
I
for
heard
the
that
Future.
one.
And Bob Johansson said something beautiful, which
Yep.
was, we always talk about guardrails,
Yep.
but of course you hit a guardrail, you smash into it and your car, collapses. And he's talking a bit more about like bounce ropes in a boxing ring.
Yeah.
So there's your constraint. And so you nudge up against the constraint and it gives a little bit and then comes back. And maybe it stays out because you've discovered new terrain. Or
Yeah.
maybe it
But
snaps back a bit more because you've gone too far. I thought
but
that
the
was such a good metaphor.
stanchions, right? The stanchions that hold the bounce rope,
Are locked.
locked solid.
Absolutely.
It's the
Absolutely
rope
solid.
where the bounce can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great point. As that kookaburra
The
agrees with the
kookaburras,
point in
yeah.
the background. How Australian for our
I
non-Australian listeners.
I
The
know.
iconic kookaburra laugh. How brilliant. So, and, I'm just curious, just a couple last questions. Number one, if you think of your vision for the future that
Mhm.
you are really contributing to through your work and our work, which I'm very grateful for, what would you say a school of the future, from the future, your preferred future, looks like, feels like? What's the learning experience? What is the professional culture? What kind of management and systems are there? And what's happening in the places, spaces? I know it's a big question, but like what are some of the design principles at least that perhaps would come to your mind?
When you were asking that question, I came back to my really basic mantra of why I do this work. It came to me years ago. I just wanna make schools better for kids. And when the person in the street sort of says to me when I check in, right, I'm doing
Yeah.
something I was getting a car the other day at a car rental at an airport, and giving my
Huh.
email, and the man goes, "What's the learning future?" And I kind of explained it, and I said, "Well, you know what? We just wanna make schools better for kids." And all of those things are saying, "That's all we wanna do. Better for kids and their future, and where they're headed,
Mm,
and understanding that the world that we are of the now, not even the future, the world of the now is really different to the experience that I had when I was at school. But I fear that some students still have that experience that I had at school.
yeah.
And so we need to be brave to encompass all of these things. We need to be brave. We're not treating our young people like guinea pigs to say, we're going to test this on you. No, we have that confidence and that optimism to say, we're gonna work with this, and we're gonna make it better to have them to have the skills that they need for the future. You and I talk a lot about the types of attributes our young people are going to need: agency, belonging, curiosity, discernment, and embodiment. There are 5. Well, if a student is just going from one class to the next and they're sitting all day, they're not embodied learning.
Yeah.
And if they're going off to do an assignment and they're just downloading the latest AI answer, they don't have a discernment. And there's all these things we want schools to be, And that sense of agency is having their voice in the mix is so critical. And that's why we love talking to kids, right? We do a lot of focus
Mm.
groups with young people, and I just love hearing their perspectives of schools because I tell them, "You know more about this school than anyone."
Yeah, it's so good. I had a brief conversation with Larry Rosenstock from High Tech High recently. I think I told you, Anne,
Yeah.
and I've had him on on the podcast before in the kind of early days. Founded High Tech High, 15 schools, amazing. And the thing he kept on coming back to was kids know things we don't know. They know things. We should listen to that. He was just so on message with it. It's kind of funny, the identity piece of do I, f- do I, it's my self concept, the knower, the activator, the facilitator, the learner,
Mm.
or all those things
All those things, yeah.
as it's contextually relevant. I think
Yeah.
there's a calcification of identity in our world that's quite problematic
Mm.
for all of us
Mm.
because we create our own ceiling and then we
Yeah.
can't evolve because I say, this is who I am
Yeah.
today, not this is who I'm becoming. And I think there's that process of becoming that is just, I mean, if it's not the core purpose of schooling, education, learning, I'd challenge someone to say there's another process that's more a process of becoming. And I mean, learning, the expansion of the human spirit, of the human knowledge, of the skill set, of the dispositions, the attributes, our own uniqueness. Um,
Mm.
so thank you, Anne, for your uniqueness and what you
Thank
bring to
you.
our work and to this world and to education, through all the things that I feel very lucky to do with you. I'd love you just to reflect and share something that you want to leave our listeners with. What's something that, that for you, from your unique vantage point, you want to say to everyone listening and watching?
I'm a big believer in, what leaps into your head. And I guess I wanna tell people, you don't have to have the answers. You have to know the problem, but you don't there's enough of us together that we can find a way forward and work toward an answer, which may not be the solution or answer. But I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have to be the one to solve a problem, particularly leaders, and you
Yeah,
don't have to be. You've got good people around you. Draw on them.
drops mic. Thank you, Anne. For this wonderful chat in kind of a formal setting, which is quite unique for you and I, with all the time
Mm,
we spend together. Well done on the book, School by
thanks.
Design, which is available everywhere, uh,
Everywhere, everywhere.
including
The
and
video.
in Anne's hand, including at thelearningfuture.com via our shop, which is actually
Mm,
the best way to buy it because Anne gets the most return on her investment of time through going through that. Um, but yeah, it's been wonderful to chat with you and just so good to see this work evolve over a number of
thanks.
years as well, Anne. So
Thank you.
thank you, and
Thanks
thank you
for
for joining me on this journey and on the Learning Future podcast.
thank you so much.